We all know the story of the Titanic. It's the legendary, unsinkable ship that tragically met its end on its very first voyage back in April 1912. But in this explainer, we're not just looking at the sinking itself. We are digging into a very specific, honestly chilling mystery. Why in the world did a highly experienced 62-year-old commander, Captain Edward John Smith, knowingly sail a massive ship packed with thousands of people full speed into a well-documented deadly ice field?
So, why did he ignore the warnings? That is the absolute core of our investigation today. Because as we look at the data, you'll see this was not just some freak accident or a sudden, unpredictable ambush by Mother Nature. This was a completely preventable disaster, one driven by very specific human choices, a massive amount of hubris, and intense, relentless pressure. But to really grasp why those warnings were brushed aside, we first need to get inside the heads of the people on board.
Part 1. The myth of the Titanic. To really get it, we have to understand the sheer mind-boggling scale of this vessel and the extreme luxury that gave absolutely everyone, from the builders to the passengers, this fatal sense of invincibility. To put things into perspective, back in 1912, the Titanic cost $7.5 million to construct. If we adjust that for inflation, we are talking about a $400 million machine in today's money. It was an absolute marvel. At 269 meters long and over 53 meters high, it was literally the largest ship on the planet. And you know, when you pour the equivalent of nearly $500 million into building something, you kind of expect it to be flawless. It created this undeniable aura of perfection. And it wasn't just massive. The luxury was off the charts. We are talking facilities that blew the best five-star hotels of the era completely out of the water. Stained glass mirrors, a heated swimming pool, which was unheard of, Turkish and electric baths, a full squash court, and 4 different restaurants. It's no wonder the public was so obsessed. But that opulence bred some serious arrogance. The vice president of the White Star Line, the company behind the ship, was so confident that he actually declared to the public that the Titanic was, quote, unsinkable.
But here is the wild part about that invincibility complex. They heavily touted this highly engineered double-bottom hull as their ultimate safety net. But that incredible feature was completely useless when the iceberg struck the side of the ship. The sides only had a single layer of protection. It was a massive oversight, basically an Achilles heel that nobody bothered to worry about.
Part 2. A trail of ignored warnings. Let's look closely at the incident itself and break down the timeline, because the crew had so many chances to change their fate, and they threw every single one of them away. Walk through this timeline with me because it is incredibly frustrating. Just 2 days into the trip, on April 12th, they get their first ice warnings. They tweak their course a little bit, but they don't slow down. Then, fast forward to April 14th. Over the course of the day, the Titanic receives 7 explicit ice warnings from other ships via radio. 7. And yet, Captain Smith keeps the ship tearing through the ocean at 21.5 knots. That's about 40 kilometers per hour. On a pitch-black, moonless night, where freezing winds are literally making the lookout's eyes water so badly they can barely see. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet finally spots the iceberg and rings the alarm. 1 minute later, at 11:40, they hit it. It is honestly hard to wrap your head around the physics of this crash. Scientists estimate that iceberg weighed a staggering 1.5 million tons. Think about that. A mountain of ice as big as a football field and as tall as the ship's crow's nest, scraping along the front right side of the hull for 10 agonizing seconds. Now, remember the watertight compartments? The ship had 16 of them and could survive if up to 4 flooded. But this massive 1.5 million ton impact breached 6. The math was brutally simple at that point. The unsinkable ship was going to sink. Part 3. The pressure for speed. So we circle back to the big question. With all those warnings, why did a veteran like Captain Smith flat out refuse to slow the ship down? Well, it all points to intense corporate pressure from the very top. You see, for the White Star Line, just being the biggest and most luxurious ship wasn't enough. They needed to be the fastest. There was immense pressure to complete this maiden transatlantic voyage in exactly 6 days. They wanted the sensational headlines, they wanted to break records. This wasn't just a fun pleasure cruise for the company. It was a high-stakes, highly publicized corporate demonstration. And Captain Smith felt the entire weight of those expectations on his shoulders. And this next detail shows you exactly how toxic that pressure really was. Investigations point to a deeply troubling moment involving Joseph Bruce, the chairman of the White Star Line, who was actually on the ship. Around 2 p.m. on the day of the crash, Captain Smith reportedly handed Bruce a very clear ice warning, strongly implying they should drop their speed. But Bruce actively hid it. He literally stuffed the paper into his pocket so the crew wouldn't see it, absolutely refusing to let the ship slow down. That one moment of pure corporate hubris essentially signed their death warrants. Part 4. A chain of fatal errors. That single, disastrous decision to prioritize speed over safety set off a cascading domino effect of catastrophic human errors. The mistake started the exact second they realized they were in trouble. When the alarm bell rang at 11:39 p.m., the first officer commanded the ship to be steered left. But in a moment of sheer, blinding panic, the steersman, Robert Hitchens, misunderstood. Under all that sudden pressure, he steered the ship right, in the exact wrong direction, right into the path of the iceberg. By the time he realized what he'd done, it was way too late. And the tragedy hits a whole new level of heartbreak when you look at what was happening just a few miles away. The SS Californian was sitting a mere 37 kilometers away. They were actually the ones who sent the Titanic its final ice warning that night. Because they saw the ice, they did the smart thing. They stopped for the night. But tragically, they turned off their radio at 11:15 p.m. When the Titanic hit the ice and started firing distress rockets into the dark sky, the crew on the Californian literally watched it happen. But their captain dismissed the flares, figuring the rich folks on the Titanic were just throwing a late-night party. If they had just turned on their radio or investigated, so many lives could have been saved. Instead, everyone was left to fend for themselves. Which brings us to this utterly terrifying math. There were roughly 2,200 people on board, but only 20 lifeboats, meaning they only had capacity for about 1,200 people. Because they really bought into their own unsinkable hype, they didn't even bother putting enough lifeboats on the ship. Captain Smith had even canceled the passenger safety drills earlier that day, so when the evacuation started, it was chaos. The passengers weren't even taking it seriously at first. The very first lifeboat, which could hold 65 people, was lowered into the ocean with only 28 people in it, because everyone just assumed they were safer on the big ship. But by 2:20 a.m., the horrific reality could no longer be ignored. The massive ship broke in half and slipped beneath the surface. For the 1,500 people who didn't get a spot on a lifeboat, the contrast was just brutal. A few hours earlier, they were relaxing in heated swimming pools. Now they were plunged into ocean water that was a freezing -2 degrees Celsius. In water that cold, hypothermia shuts down a human body in a matter of minutes. In under 3 hours, the grandest, most unsinkable ship ever built was just gone. Part 5. The Aftermath and New Rules. Let's wrap this up by looking at the legacy of this disaster, because the sheer scale of the tragedy shocked the entire world into action and completely rewrote the laws of the sea. The changes were swift and global. In 1914, the International Ice Patrol was established to constantly track icebergs and warn ships. The SOLAS Treaty, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, was signed, setting strict new safety standards. And no surprise here, absolute strict mandates were put in place ensuring that every single ship on the ocean must carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board. It was a crucial, necessary lesson, but it was paid for in blood and ice. As for the ship itself, it sat lost in the dark for over 70 years. The wreckage was finally discovered in 1985, sitting about 3.8 kilometers deep on the ocean floor. But it's not going to be there much longer. Deep-sea bacteria are rapidly eating away at the metal, and experts think the entire wreck will completely disintegrate by 2030. Interestingly, an Australian billionaire named Clive Palmer actually tried to build an exact modern replica called Titanic II. But as of 2022, that project is totally stalled. Turns out, a cruise without modern amenities like Wi-Fi doesn't exactly sell tickets today. Which leaves us with this final thought. As the physical remains of the Titanic prepare to vanish forever into the ocean, and as modern attempts to revive its glory stall out, we really have to ask ourselves, the Titanic didn't just sink because an iceberg happened to be in the way. It sank because of relentless pressure for speed, consciously ignored warnings, and completely blinding arrogance. So will humanity ever truly learn from the hubris of the unsinkable ship, or are we just destined to keep repeating the exact same dangerous mistakes of overconfidence? Definitely something to think about as you navigate the pressures in your own life. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and keep questioning everything.